When it comes to bush honeysuckle, the most popular variety in our invasive species would be the Amur honeysuckle on there. There's a couple of more, but it is an invasive species. So I just wanted to start out as what's an invasive plant. An invasive species, basically the definition, if you look at the USDA website, is like a non-native or alien to the ecosystem under consideration. And those that are introduced that can cause or likely to cause an environmental or economic harm to our environment or to the human health. So these invasive species, the impact on those, the invasive species basically are competing directly with our native species for the moisture, sunlight, nutrients, and space. Overall, plant diversity can be decreased with the invasive species, and establishment and spread of invasive species really can reduce wildlife habitat in our woodland areas also. The common name basically is bush honeysuckle. There's a few varieties out there, but I'm just going to revert to bush honeysuckle. Basically, the bush honeysuckle shades out our native wildflowers and our young native trees that are in our forest floors. They also secrete a chemical into the soil that can hinder growth of our native trees on there. Birds are tempted to nest in the bush honeysuckle on there, but they basically suffer higher nesting issues and stuff when because they're too close to the ground when it comes to that. So it's not good for our wildlife on there. I have the map that kind of shows you it's everywhere. It's spread everywhere. It was introduced in the late 1800s for ornamental bush. It also later on was being used for erosion control and is just spread from there. When we're looking at how to identify bush honeysuckle, it's a large upright shrub. It can go to 15 to 20 feet. The flowers change colors, so it kind of goes from white to yellow. And the berries, you see them probably right now on there. I know we get a lot of calls on identifying them. They're very red, looks very juicy red on there. It is pretty, but we don't want it. The leaves are opposite and they're simple on there. A lot of the invasive species, and in bush honeysuckle is one of them, they green up earlier than our native vegetative. So in the spring, you'll see they'll be green sooner, and then they die down later in the fall on there. So we really see it. So if you kind of look at that, especially in our woodland areas, they're an understory shrub in the woodlands, and they just kind of choke out any of our native tree seedlings that might come through. The flowers are pretty, so they normally flower between May to June. They're pretty fragrant. The petals will go from white or pink, and then they'll start changing yellow with the age on there. Here's the fruit I was talking about on there. So normally we're seeing the fruit now. So September to October is when it kind of matures on there. They're little red berries. They have a lot of sugar content, but they don't give a lot of protein for our wildlife. So they don't put on the fat that they would need for the winter time on there. When we're trying to manage this, and we do want to manage this, they may be pretty, but they are an invasive species and they do a lot of harm to our ecosystem on there. So trying to control them, you can do a mechanical control. So they are pretty shallow rooted when they're young. So the young plants, normally we can pull up by hand when the soil is moist. Obviously, when we're going through the drought, the soil is not moist, so it can kind of be hard to get them picked up. But young plants are pretty shallow rooted, so you can normally do that. They do have a grabbing tool that can aid pulling the larger plants out. That is pretty labor intensive. Another cultural control on there would be a prescribed fire. You can take this prescribed fire and you can burn these. Basically, you're killing the seedlings, or you normally are top killing any of the larger ones, but you're setting those seedlings back on there and kind of using up their root reserve. A chemical control, when you look at it, the research kind of is saying foliar applications has the tendency to be most effective way of controlling the bush honeysuckle on there. Glyphosate or triclopyr are the active ingredients, herbicides that is the most effective when you're kind of controlling this. We want to apply the foliar applications when the plant is leafed out. Normally, a fall's a good time to treat these with them before the leaves turn yellow. So, and if you're using a glyphosate, glyphosate's a non-selective herbicide. So if you get it on anything else, it's going to kill that. So doing it in the fall when maybe our native vegetation's leaves have already dropped on there, but the bush honeysuckle leaves are out, it's a good time to treat that. You could do a basal bark application on there, plants 4 inches in diameter or less, and that's going to be with the trichopyr rate on there, or you can do a cut stump. I'm just going to say that if anybody has been battling bush honeysuckle, it's a sprouter. So if we do cut it, you're going to need to treat it quickly on there because it does like to sprout up from that. And we want to basically treat that stump within 10 minutes of cutting it before it basically heals up and then the chemical can't be moved through. We always have to do a disclaimer when we're talking about herbicides or chemicals on there. Always read and follow the label directions. That's the law. And when you're chemically treating plants over or near water areas, you need to use a herbicide that's labeled for aquatic systems on there. Some resources out there, Missouri Invasive Plant Task Force, that's a really good website to go to. There's also the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network, and Missouri Department of Conservation, MDC, has an invasive field guide that kind of helps control that.